It wasn't supposed to land like that. Not like a confession. Not like a crack in something that had been carefully controlled for years. It was meant to be a throwaway moment, another late-night interview, another predictable question, another rehearsed answer wrapped in charm and deflection. But something shifted, almost imperceptibly, in the way she held the silence. And when she finally spoke, she didn't just answer the question. She disrupted an entire narrative that had been quietly maintained for nearly a decade. The room changed first. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. A flicker in the audience. A pause that lasted a fraction too long. The kind of pause that tells you something has slipped through that wasn't meant to. Because when she said it, calmly, almost playfully, it didn't sound like performance. It didn't sound like someone promoting a film or revisiting a role that had long since passed. It sounded like someone acknowledging something real, and then realizing, perhaps a second too late, that the world was listening far more closely than expected. And that's where this story actually begins, not with the films, not with the casting, not with the chemistry everyone thinks they understand, but with control. Who had it, who lost it, and what happens when a carefully constructed illusion begins to blur at the edges. Because for years, the narrative around their connection had been airtight. Professional, disciplined, rehearsed in the way all Hollywood dynamics are rehearsed when too many people are watching. They were co-stars. They were collaborators. They were, above all, safe in the eyes of the public, safe from speculation, safe from scandal, safe from crossing that invisible line audiences are always desperate to believe exists. But here's the uncomfortable truth that no one really wants to confront. Audiences don't fall in love with performances. They fall in love with what they suspect is real. And once that suspicion takes hold, it doesn't matter how many interviews, how many clarifications, how many carefully worded explanations are offered. The idea becomes stronger than the facts. And in their case, that idea had been growing quietly for years. It was there in the way conversations lingered just a second longer than necessary. In the way laughter seemed to carry something unsaid beneath it. In the way their interactions, no matter how controlled, never quite felt like two people who were simply doing a job. There was always something else. Something subtle, but persistent. Something that didn't need to be confirmed to be felt. Which is exactly why that one sentence mattered so much. Because it didn't confirm what people thought it would confirm. It did something far more dangerous. It validated the feeling without defining it. And that's where things spiral. Because once you validate emotion without boundaries, people begin to fill in the gaps themselves. And they always go further than the truth. Within hours, what had been a quiet moment turned into a full-blown narrative shift. Not because of what was said, but because of how easily it could be interpreted. Headlines didn't just repeat her words, they reshaped them. Conversations didn't just analyze the moment, they expanded it into something bigger, something more intimate, something far less controlled than anything either of them had ever publicly acknowledged. But here's where it gets interesting, because the reaction wasn't just about curiosity. It was about validation. For years, people had believed they were seeing something real between them. Not in a dramatic, scandalous way, but in a quiet, almost unspoken way. A connection that didn't need to be declared because it revealed itself in smaller, harder to fake moments. And suddenly, that belief didn't feel irrational anymore. It felt justified. Which raises a much more uncomfortable question, one that goes beyond interviews and headlines and viral clips. If what people saw wasn't entirely imagined, then what exactly were they witnessing all those years? Because there's a difference between acting and emotional exposure. And the line between the two is far thinner than most people realize. When two actors are placed in situations that demand vulnerability, not surface-level performance, but genuine emotional openness, something shifts. It becomes less about pretending and more about accessing something real within yourself. And when that process is repeated over time, under pressure, in environments where boundaries are constantly negotiated, the connection that forms doesn't simply disappear when the cameras stop rolling. It lingers. Not always in obvious ways. Not always in ways that can be explained or defined, but in ways that change how two people see each other, respond to each other, and perhaps most importantly, remember each other. And that's where their story becomes less about speculation and more about impact. Because regardless of what actually happened or didn't happen, the experience itself was real. The trust required was real. The vulnerability was real. And those things don't exist in isolation. They leave a mark. They create a kind of emotional imprint that doesn't fade just because a project ends, which makes her words far more significant than they first appeared. Because when she said it never felt fake, she wasn't confirming a rumor. She was revealing a truth about the process itself, one that most audiences don't fully understand, but instinctively recognize. And that recognition is what fuels everything that followed. Because now, the question isn't whether something happened between them in the way people assume. That's the wrong question entirely. The real question, the one that actually matters, is far more complicated. What happens when two people share something deeply real, but never define it? What happens when that connection is confined to a specific moment in time, a specific context, a specific set of circumstances, and then quietly left behind, unresolved? And perhaps most importantly, what happens when years later, that connection is brought back into the light, not through confession, but through a single unguarded moment? Because that's the part no one is talking about. Not the past, not the rumors, not the scenes everyone fixates on, but the present. The fact that even now, after everything has settled, after the distance, after the silence, the connection still feels active. Not in an obvious way, not in a dramatic, headline-driven way, but in a way that refuses to fully disappear. And that's what makes this story so difficult to close, because it was never just about what happened. It was about what remained. And in part 2, that's exactly where things begin to unravel, because when the other side finally responds, even briefly, even carefully, it doesn't clarify anything. It deepens the mystery. And once both perspectives are out there, even in fragments, even in carefully chosen words, the dynamic shifts in a way neither of them can fully control anymore. The moment he responded, everything became more complicated, not clearer, not resolved, but heavier, like a door that had been nudged open just enough to reveal there was far more behind it than anyone had anticipated. Because silence can be controlled, silence can be managed, shaped, even weaponized. But response, even a measured one, creates movement. And movement invites interpretation. What made his reaction so powerful wasn't what he said. It was what he allowed. A small shift in tone. A willingness, however brief, to step outside the rigid structure that had defined their public narrative for years. And in that shift, something subtle but undeniable surfaced, a kind of acknowledgement that didn't confirm anything directly, yet refused to dismiss it either. That middle ground is where stories like this become dangerous. Because certainty closes conversations. Ambiguity fuels them. And he chose ambiguity. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but carefully, almost as if he understood exactly how much to give and exactly how much to hold back. Which raises a question most people overlook. Was that restraint instinctive or deliberate? Because there's a difference between someone being cautious and someone being strategic. And when you've spent years navigating an industry built on perception, you don't accidentally step into moments like that without understanding the consequences. He could have shut it down. Completely. One clear sentence, one firm denial, and the entire wave of speculation would have lost its momentum. That's how these situations usually work. But he didn't do that. Instead, he chose something far more complex. He validated the experience without defining it. It was real in its own way. A sentence like that doesn't end a conversation. It multiplies it. Because what does real mean in that context? Real emotionally? Real professionally? Real in a way that exists between categories, somewhere outside the language people expect? The ambiguity isn't accidental. It creates space. And in that space, the audience begins to construct its own version of the truth. But here's where it becomes less about public reaction and more about something deeper, because his response didn't exist in isolation. It echoed hers. Not identically, not intentionally aligned in any obvious way, but close enough to feel connected. And when two people describe the same experience using similar emotional language, even years apart, it suggests something that goes beyond coincidence. It suggests memory. Not the kind of memory that fades or distorts over time, but the kind that stays intact because it was never fully processed to begin with. Because unresolved experiences don't disappear, they remain active, sitting just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to resurface. And that's exactly what this was. Not a revelation, not a confession, a resurfacing. Which is why the reaction from those watching, fans, media, insiders, felt almost immediate, almost instinctive. Because people weren't just responding to what was being said, they were responding to what felt unfinished. And unfinished stories are the most compelling ones of all, because they invite participation. They pull people in, not as observers, but as interpreters. Suddenly, everything became evidence. Every old interview was revisited, every shared glance re-examined, every moment that once seemed insignificant now reframed as part of a larger, hidden narrative. And the more people searched, the more they found not necessarily facts, but fragments. Pieces that, when arranged in a certain way, told a story that felt coherent, even if it wasn't entirely accurate. But accuracy was never the point. Emotion was. Because people don't engage with stories like this based on logic. They engage based on resonance. And something about their dynamic, something that had been present from the very beginning, resonated in a way that refused to fade. Which brings us to a more uncomfortable layer of this entire situation, the power dynamic. Not in the obvious sense. Not in terms of hierarchy or control on set, but in the emotional architecture of what they were asked to create together. Because when two people are placed in roles that demand intensity, vulnerability, and a level of trust that extends beyond normal professional boundaries, the relationship that forms isn't neutral. It can't be. There's an inherent imbalance in that kind of connection, not because one person holds more power than the other, but because both are operating in an environment where authenticity is required, yet containment is expected. They're asked to access something real and then immediately package it as performance. That contradiction doesn't resolve itself cleanly. It creates